The second point that we need to note from this is, given the economic disparity between countries like Thailand and countries like Myanmar, given the porous borders and the demand for labor on the one side and the increase in supply on the other, we need to get smart about our messaging about anti-trafficking work, anti-trafficking issues in source communities. Don't migrate, or else you will be trafficked. That kind of scare messaging, they won't work. Because in reality, a failed migrant worker will never share his or her story. But a new television set, a new motorbike, or a new roof over a successful migrant worker will send a very strong and positive messages about migration. So our message about trafficking in source communities needs to be more sophisticated and focused to assist the potential migrant workers with the information they need. Because at the end of the day, it is informed migration that reduces vulnerability, not just at the source community, but throughout the whole process of migration. Now let's look at what happened to the survivors of the tragedy and what can we learn from it. There were, as Anna says, the immigration authorities on the Thai side immediately considered them as illegal migrant workers and they were put in detention center. That was one approach, the approach taken by the law enforcement of Thailand. At the same time, the Ministry of Human Security and Social Development from Thailand says they may be illegal migrant workers, but they are children. And according to the child law in our country, they cannot be put into the detention center, so they have to be moved to a safe house. The only problem we had there was a safe house was in another city, which was about 3 hours away. Now, there are a couple of challenges that confront us in these approaches. In the implementation of the first approach, the law enforcement approach, that approach did not give time for the survivors to stabilize or to recover from their extremely traumatic experience. The law enforcement authorities in Ranong were under great pressure from the central government to speed up the investigation and to prosecute. They were also under great pressure from the government of Myanmar to release these victims from detention and to repatriate them to their home country. So, due time for reflection for the survivors were neglected. This meant that there was imbalance and tension between the rights of the victims, which is what we should have, and the interests of the criminal justice process. Also, the fact that because these migrant workers did not have the documentations, and because of that they were immediately taken to be just illegal migrant workers, also did not follow one of the key recommendations when we are fighting trafficking. And that one of the key recommendations is, quote, "Trafficked persons shall not be detained, charged, or prosecuted for the illegality of their entry into or residence in countries of transit and destination, or for their involvement in unlawful activities to the extent that such involvement is a direct consequence of their situation as trafficked persons." So this recommendation was entirely neglected by the authorities. With regard to the children being taken to a safe house, it sounds good. But the problem was the children were emotionally dependent on the adults that they had come. They didn't want to be separated. And at the time when the recommendation to take the children to the safe house was made, they had not consulted the children. And they had not consulted the other survivors of this incident. So as you can see, this situation was fraught with challenges right from the start. But despite these challenges, it must be acknowledged that when we compare how this case was handled to other trafficking cases, I think this went very speedily. And to a certain extent, I would like to attribute it to how this was handled later on, to the collaboration and the active partnership between the NGOs and the law enforcement officials of the two countries. The best interests of the victims remain paramount through the investigation and the trial after that initial stage. The survivors were given full psychosocial support, including interpretation, and they were kept fully appraised about the development of the case. They were consulted, their views were sought, their views were respected. I just want to say that at present, compensation has been awarded to the families, and this is very this is very rare in Asia. So compensation has been awarded to the families of the deceased, and the survivors have been repatriated home, and World Vision is actively involved in following up with reintegration assistance. So as a complex crime, whose root causes are multiple, with multiple layers of vulnerability such as poverty, lack of access to education, lack of appropriate legal framework, or poor law enforcement, including discriminatory practices, we need to make sure that we adopt a multi-sectoral approach to be successful in our fight against this dehumanizing crime of trafficking. We need to make sure that our police and our immigration officers work with civil society organizations, with the judiciary, with the prosecution. We also need to make sure that, given the transnational nature of this crime, that governments in the source community works together with governments in the destination community, and if possible, also with the transit countries. The most important thing I want to yes, people say that trafficking is very complex and it's very difficult to solve. But I would say that the most important thing for us to take away when dealing with trafficking is about exploitation. Trafficking is not difficult, it is all about exploitation. It is about making profit out of a person through unscrupulous means and practices. It is about placing or holding a person in a situation that he or she cannot get out because of coercion, because of fear, because of debt bondage. So what can we do about it? We can do a number of things to eliminate crime that feeds into the misery of others. In a global village of ours today, where the patterns of consumption in one place has a direct impact on the production of another, we as consumers can learn to be more thoughtful about our consumption, to see whether our demand for cheap goods and services are indirectly or directly fueling the unethical business practices elsewhere or even in our own backyard. We can assist or pressure the business sector as well as the government to be more vigilant about the supply chain to enable that no child labor, bonded labor, or exploitative labor has been used in the production of goods and services that we consume. I'm a foreigner in your country, and it's been 1.5 years since I've arrived in Australia, and I would like to say that the level of concern and the engagement that I see in the Australians about injustice around the world has been like a breath of fresh air for me. And I know that you will do what it takes to help the government and society to lead the fight against trafficking in Asia and around the world. One Just World, this initiative taken by the International Development Agency, the Australian Government, and World Vision, with collaboration from Asian Research Centre, Murdoch University, for me it stands out as a splendid example of the kind of initiative that you take to bring the issue of global concern to your doorstep. Thank you.